الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والفجر وليال عشر صدق الله العلي العظيم. Our session has gone into its fifth night. Last night we concluded that du'as change destiny, du'as change fate. In these 10 nights we have an opportunity to change our destiny and to change the course of history. As you look around throughout the world, for those people who are on media, WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, you see that whenever there's an issue in the world, straight away you get the updates. These days, you don't necessarily need to go and look what's happening on television. And the fact of the matter is that these updates are coming very quickly to us. On the one hand, you are seeing atrocity upon atrocity being committed all over the world. And on the other hand, we're becoming desensitized day by day to these atrocities. Before, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when you heard about a death, it would move you. But today it's become so frequent that it desensitizes you. It makes no difference to your life. Within an hour, you've forgotten it. And these days, not only that, you delete it and you move on. The world is suffering and there's great pain in the world today. Even within Toronto, if you look at the problems that we have as our communities, you find people are suffering. You find people don't have food to eat, but other people don't realize it. You find people who are going out of their way just to come to the centers. An hour to 2 hours they're driving in the cold weather. You find and you look around and you see people don't have enough food to eat, bills to pay, children to educate. And all of these things are happening right under our noses today, but we don't have any news of this and we don't really care about these problems which are taking place in our societies. And slowly as this desensitization process takes place, you are moving away from your humanity and you are going towards that which is known as animalism, shifting away, moving away. You see, one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century was this, that we advanced in everything but one thing. Technologically we advanced, in terms of leaders we advanced, in every scope in the physical world we advanced, but we forgot one reality, and that's the other half of the human being, that human beings are made of 2 things, one the physical entity and one the spiritual entity. We looked at our bodies, but we forgot our souls. And this is why you see today in the world that you find more depressed people, more people suffering from mental health, more people who are unstable, more people who are suffering. And you're not unable to get over that suffering. You know, you go back, right, maybe a generation. Go back to East Africa, go back to Iraq, go back to Iran, go back to Pakistan. You find that your ancestors maybe didn't have what you have today, but they were satisfied in that. And if you go back to yourself and see in the 70s that maybe you didn't have what you have today, but you were satisfied. But as societies begin to develop, you find that satisfaction is leaving society. Why is it? What was the one thing in the 20th century that was exploded on us that today we are like this? And that one thing was individualism to the extreme. Today you don't care about society, but you care about yourself. Competition. Competition, healthy competition is good, but not that competition that cuts off the legs of every single other person for you to get to a location. And what that essentially means is that we are not taking care of our souls today. You see, in the same way you have vitamins, right? The purpose of these vitamins or vitamins is what? To balance your physical body. You find that your internal body also needs this because your internal body has been created for the divine. So essentially what happens? When your internal body is in balance, then nothing can affect you and nothing can touch you. Go back to the religions of before, pre-Islam. In fact, go back to the first religions that you find. If you go into Hinduism today, and if you look at the dialogue in the Gita that Krishna is having with Arjuna, what is the purpose of this? On the basis, it's a battle, right? There's a battle going on, but Krishna is teaching Arjuna, and he's telling him, despite the battle that's there, what is it? It's an analogy for the internal battle that's taking place. The fact is that you balance yourself, and when you balance yourself, pain and suffering is removed. If you look at the Buddha's teaching, right? What was the purpose of the Buddha? To remove pain and suffering from our lives to balance us. It isn't just sufficient that you build your bodies and you have those 24-inch biceps and that 32-inch waist, and the 44 in chest, because it doesn't help you. You find that those people are also depressed. Those people are also suffering. The idea is that you remove that internal suffering so that you get to a state of balance. What is that one stage where you find humanity at balance? And that stage is in Karbala. You find that Sayyid al-Shuhada, after giving lives after lives, is in a state of balance. And go back and see what the narrators say. A Christian narrator writes, he says, as the day went on, and as they gave lives upon lives, he said, I could see the nur on the face of Hussein ibn Ali shine like the sun. It was as if he was in utter peace. But don't take it from me or don't take it from him. Take it from Allah. You know what Allah says? Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. You see, Sayyid al-Shuhada was in a state of peace and tranquility. So essentially, the purpose of us following a religion today is so that our internal facets reach that stability. Because you have thousands of emotions which run through you on a given basis. You know, you wake up in the morning, right? And you're cranky and you want to go to sleep again. And somehow you force yourself into the car. And especially if it's a hot day, and you go out and it's 8 o'clock, and someone cuts you up, right? The driver cuts you. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? For the majority of us, the first thing is 2 fingers come out. That's what happens naturally. You want to swear at the person. Why? Because you're in imbalance inside of yourself. You get angry quickly. You shout, you scream, emotions are running. At any given time, you have thousands of emotions running through you. But what is the purpose of Islam essentially? One of the purpose is to take you towards balance and peace. To take you towards that sakina, right? That sakina that the Quran talks about, that divine peace inside of yourself. Allah is that person who puts inside of you a sakina. Why did Sayyid al-Shuhada call his daughter Sakina? Because when he looked at her, it gave him internal peace. See, that is the status of our daughters as well, that even Sayyid al-Shuhada says that. So you see, it's the internal peace. Is that internal movement. And as we know that within theology there are 2 things. World theology. If you take world theology, they say the only reason we follow religion is for 2 reasons. One of them is that internal peace, and the other one is that flight towards perfection. Internal peace is horizontal, the flight towards perfection is vertical. In another word, akhlaq is horizontal so that you can get virtue, right? The purpose of akhlaq, virtue. To lie is bad. Why to lie is bad? Not because Allah gets a kick out of telling you not to lie. It's because it imbalances you from the inside. You know, for example, in the physical world, when you have an overbalance of vitamin D and a lack of vitamin C, my brother doctors will tell you exactly what happens then. In the same way, when you lie, imbalances you. When you not teach, but steal, it imbalances you. What else? When you swear, imbalances you. When you have all of these vices, it imbalances you. That's why, forget Islam, go to Aristotle. Aristotle says, balance yourself through virtue. The purpose of this balance is that what happens? You're not in imbalance. Imbalance causes what? Depression. It causes a man to go into terminal decline. It causes a person to suffer. The purpose of Islam, therefore, is to remove that suffering from your life. You see, if all of us, in some stage of our life, begin to suffer, and in the 20th century, you've seen more suffering than anything. Despite the fact that we live in a global village, despite the fact that you have memory overload, information cramming, there's so much that you go to Wikipedia, you found thousands and thousands of profiles there, just on a particular topic. But what you realize is this, that the balance isn't there. And this is why in the 20th century and in the Western world, people have been going towards mysticism. Hare Krishnas in the 50s, right? Sufism in the 80s. All sorts of Kabbalah in the 90s. The purpose of this, to somehow go towards mysticism, because the human being realizes that we have a soul that needs peace, and that soul is an attaining peace. So what do? We go towards all of these mysticisms so that it takes us towards peace. For Muslims, go back to Islam and see all the solutions are there to get towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only peace essentially lies in the dhikr of Allah. Ala bi dhikrullah tatma'innul qulub. The only peace lies in Allah. But we need to understand how. We need to journey into such a way that we can attain that peace. Why do, for example, the mystics recite dhikr or afkar? The purpose of these dhikrs is what? To gain that peace, to give yourself that internal peace. And you've heard of all of these scandals and all of these things and all of these Sufi sects which have been coming out. But the fact is, what is true irfan? What is true ma'rif of Allah? What is the true essence of this that takes you towards balance? Inshallah, we have a number of nights to deal with it. But how does this link up to the system of the 12th Imam? How does this take us back to Sayyid al-Shuhada? What is the purpose of Sayyid al-Shuhada in helping us to balance ourselves? If you look at the irony of it, Sayyid al-Shuhada standing in Karbala, the most difficult moment for any man is to see his family annihilated, and that man is in a state of peace. Why? Because he has a connection with Allah. So the purpose of our life is what? To gain that connection. How do we gain that connection? And how is it linked back to the 12th Imam? Let's start off on a journey. The next 40 minutes or so, let's look at this, how to gain that connection. What is our purpose? What is the purpose of the Imam in facilitating us to get to that maqam? You see, Thursday night, as we discussed yesterday, the purpose of Thursday night is to call back the Imam to have all of our sins forgiven. One of the reasons why our du'as don't connect is because of our sins. Our sins become hujab, right? It pushes us back so that we can't connect. What is the purpose of Thursday night? For us to break all of those hijabs, to purify ourselves, and then when we do dua, it connects with the divine again. So we're moving away. You see, when Allah says something is haram, right? The purpose is not the fact that he gets a kick out of saying it's haram. It doesn't affect him in the least. When Allah says zina, adultery is bad, why does he say that? Because he knows that it's going to destabilize you from the inside. You see, there are 6 torments, right? 6 torments for a person who does zina. 3 in this world, 3 in the hereafter. For every action in the physical world you do, it's physical law, it's nature. For every action, there is a reaction. You speak, sound comes out. You trip over, you're going to get hurt. For everything there is. You eat or you overeat, you get a stomachache. You eat something, you find that there's a process that takes place in your stomach that converts it to energy. For everything in the physical world, there is a reaction. And in the same way, within the metaphysical world and the spiritual world, there is a reaction. So in this way, for every sin which you commit, you find that there is a reaction, and there is a negative reaction which pushes you back. So for example, zina, adultery, there are 6 torments which come upon you, 3 of them in this world. So don't complain then, for example, when in the tradition it says, Akhir zaman, you will see sudden death increases. People will have a heart attack, gone. Stroke, gone. They're walking, they fall down, they die. Akhir zaman is that time where you will see an increase in sudden deaths. Why? Because of sins. For every small thing there's a reaction. You get angry at someone. You see, there was a big Ayatollah living in Qom once. He died early. So people asked some of the ulama, why is it that he died early? One mystic came forward. He said there is a cause and effect for everything. He says the problem was that this Ayatollah, even though that is a mujtahid, but because he had a hard life, one thing that he couldn't control was his temper. Know that if a person can't control their temper, their life decreases because of the causal reality of this. And in the same way, when it comes to your family, if a person cuts the ties of the family, your brother, you're not talking to him. And you see, it's easy for us to preach sometimes, right? You tell them, look, you should have good ties with your mother and your brother and your sisters and all sorts. But when it comes to you, you don't look at it in this direction. You think everybody else should be following the Imam and they should be respecting their mothers and fathers and etc. and etc. But when it comes to you, you realize that you forget all of these things. You're fighting with your brothers. You're fighting with your sister. You're fighting with your blood relatives. But go into the hadith and see, your life decreases. When? When you fight with your relatives. I've seen it within my own life. I'm telling you an experience that I've had. 5 brothers were fighting amongst each other for 20 years. I saw between the age of 50 and 65, all of the brothers had died. All of them had died, heart attack, stroke, this and that. They died in the most miserable ways because each 5 of them were fighting amongst each other. That's a story which has happened in front of me. I'll take you on to another story. You know what happens? A person comes to the Imam. That person is the son of Mutawakkil. He comes to the 10th Imam alayhi salam. He says, my father Mutawakkil has insulted Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. He says that, can I go and kill my father? What is the hukm? The Imam says that this is blasphemy. And the hukm of blasphemy, obviously in those days, was death. So he says, it's death for your father, but you should kill your father. So Mutawakkil's son says, he says, look, can I not kill my father? He says, it's preferred that you don't kill your father. Get somebody else to do it, if you really want to go down that way. He says, but if I was to kill my father, what then? He says, know that there is a causal law. Even though your father is a sinner and wajib al-qatl, but if you were to kill your father, adhab ilahi would come because he's your father. Allah would decrease your life. You know what it says in tradition? He went and killed his father. 6 months later, he died. causal effect. The next time you sin then, the next time you think about sinning, think of the fact that for everything there is a causal effect. And this is why they say that there are 3 levels, maqamat, when it comes to a person, a believer who is going towards shredding sin. One of the statuses or the levels are that you do not sin because you are scared of the byproduct of sin. The final stage is that you do not sin for the sake of sinning because you know that any sin which is done violates Allah. So you don't sin because of the sake of Allah. But one of the maqam is this, that you stop sinning because of the side effects of sinning. So if, for example, disobeying your parents, and those people who have problems with their parents, and I wanted to raise it tomorrow or the day after, but now that we're talking about it, let's talk about it. For a person who disobeys their parents, if your parents are unhappy with you, no, Allah is not happy with you. Let me give you another tradition. It says that if your mother is happy with you, despite the fact that you may be a sinner, despite the fact that you may be going through some issues, you know what Allah says to the angels? He says, because his mother is happy with me, I'll forgive all of his sins. I'm Sattar al-Ayyub. I'll hide all of his aib and I'll forgive him and I'll help him. But no, if your mother is upset with you, then there is nothing in this world that can change that. If your mother for 1 second has tears in her eyes because of you, know that you're in terminal decline, my friends. Go and ask for forgiveness because all of the problems that you can't even dream about will come to you. Can't even dream about. Tomorrow, don't complain then if something happens to your child, or something happens to your wealth, or something happens to your health. If your mother has died angry with you, then don't complain if illness has befall you, torment and trial and tribulation. What should you do? Many a time people come to us and they say, look, give us a dua, give us a dhikr. Why? We're going through financial difficulty, especially in the credit crunch, going through financial debt. Give us something. Fine, Ahlul Bayt have given us a lot. And the du'as that the Ahlul Bayt have given, they're not our du'as. And I remember in the credit crunch, 300 people were saved from bankruptcy with certain du'as of the Ahlul Bayt. But the first stage is this, is your mother happy with you? If you're going through trial and tribulation or there's a problem in your life, the first stage is to go to your mother. Go and sit down with your mother. You know, your mother's never going to say to you, I'm upset with you. When you ask your mother, are you upset with me? She's never going to say, I'm upset with you. You know what she should do? Go and make her a cup of tea. Do something for her. Do something good for her. See, a mother's heart is soft. The mother's heart melts in front of you when you do something nice. Now imagine Allah, and imagine Allah's heart. And we talk about heart. Allah doesn't have a physical heart. But talk about Allah. Look at Allah. That Allah, 70,000 mothers. And this is all what? This is all for us to understand. Allah, look at Allah. Allah's calling upon all of you these nights. You know these 10 nights are muqaddas nights. Come back to me, is what Allah is saying. Let me give you an example. You see, a lot of times we don't understand the Quran. When you read the Quran, you don't understand the Quran. But if you look at it, Allah is speaking in love to you. Quran is a book of love where Allah speaks in love to you. Let me give you an example. You've seen a mother, right? You've seen that mother, despite the fact that however much you cause her pain, you find that that mother looks towards you with loving eyes. And when you get angry as a youth and you walk out on your mother, what does your mother say to you? She looks at you and says, son, where are you going? You see the pain in the mother's heart. Son, where are you going? Why are you leaving? Why don't you come back, son? And in anger you walk out. And that pain that goes in the heart of a mother, you don't know about that. See, they say in the time of the Bani Israel, there's a parable in the time of the Bani Israel. You know what that parable is? Let me give you that parable. It says that there was a mother and she raised her son. And there was no father. Everything she puts into that son, she raises that son. The son becomes old, youth. And at that moment, he falls in love with a girl. And the girl sees that he loves his mother. But he falls in love with her. And you know, love is that, you find it's a madness. Once you fall in love, there's no way out. So you know what happens? You know what this woman says? She says, why don't you cut the heart of your mother out and bring it to me? That mother who's raised you for 21 years. Show me your love. Cut her heart out and bring it to me. Bani Israel, saying this parable, says at night time, this young man went, he took a knife, he carved the heart of his mother, he takes it in his hand, and as he's moving, he trips and he falls to the ground. And as he falls to the ground, from the body of the mother comes, son, are you okay? See, that's the mother. That's the love of the mother. Now imagine that mother who says, son, where are you going? Why are you leaving me? Why are you moving away from me? Think about it. You know what Allah says? Look in the Quran. He says, where are you going, my servant? Wasn't I a good Lord to you? Why are you leaving me for? Didn't I give you risk? Didn't I aid you when there was no one there to aid you? Am I not waiting for you? Why don't you turn back, my slave? Why don't you turn back, my servant? In the same way these nights, Allah is waiting for you. Why don't you turn back? Whatever you've done, whatever sins you've done, however you've done it, why don't you turn back to me? This is what these nights are about. Tonight though, go to your mothers and ask if you've done anything wrong. Ask for forgiveness. Know your life will become a lot more easier. And I can almost hear people saying, but what about if our mother is not alive? What should we do then? You see, when your account is closed, when you go into alam barzakh, you find that your parents have nothing then. When you shed even a tear, make the niyyah that I'm shedding these tears for the sake of my mother, who may be suffering in her grave, who may be going through difficulty in her grave, because her account has been closed. Do something for your mother. But in fact, they say that if your dua is not being accepted and your mother has passed out, go to the grave of your mother and say to her, Mother, I'm in problems. You're my mother. Why don't you pray for me in your grave? And you find that your problems are alleviated. You know the Prophet of God says? He says that even if you don't know where the grave of your mother is, you know what? Draw a line there and then say, Mother, I'm in problems, I'm in difficulties, right? This is what the Ahlul Bayt said. You know what Sayyid al-Shuhada says when he sees Layla, right? What's happening to Layla? She's upset, she's worried. You know what Sayyid al-Shuhada said? He says, I've heard from my grandfather Rasulullah that when a child is in difficulty and a mother goes and prays, what happens? That child is removed from difficulty. If you have a problem, go to your mothers, go to your fathers, ask them. One thing then, remember in these nights, Sila Rahim. That's what Sayyid al-Shuhada teaches us. That power that you have to change your destiny. For every sin that you do, what happens then? For every single sin that you do, there is a causal effect. Why isn't the Imam coming back? Because of our sins. Why don't you balance yourself then? Balance all of your internal faculties. We'll deal with this inshallah. We've got a number of nights left. How to balance your internal faculties to remove that suffering. You see, Buddhism, right? The Buddha was talking to elites, but Islam talks to all of humanity. The Buddha, and you look at the way of the Buddha, right? It's for the elites essentially, isn't it? Not everybody can get enlightenment. Not everybody can attain that. Or as they call it in Buddhism, not everybody can attain nirvana. Or as they say in Hinduism, not everybody can attain moksha. Or as they say within Islam, everyone has the ability to get to that alam fana, to be able to connect with the Creator. Otherwise, Islam wouldn't have come for all of the masses. The difference between Islam and all other religions is it gives you the easiest pathway to attain Allah. And what is that easy pathway? That easy pathway is Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. It's that connection. It's that movement. We need to understand that. What is it that drives our Imam away from us? Our own sins. Let me ask you a question. Are you ready for the Imam to come back? If I was to, essentially, we recite the dua of the Imam. Hand on your heart. Go inside of yourself. Are you ready for the Imam to come back? Are you really ready? Let me give you a story. Maybe we'll see how ready we are. About 200 years ago or so, there was a big Ayatollah by the name of Wahid al-Bahbahani. Sayyid Wahid al-Bahbahani. Big Ayatollah. You know why he's famous for? He's famous because he took away, or he took down, or he finished off the Akhbari movement. There is a group known as the Akhbariyun, right? Very famous even in this day. In Mashhad, there's a huge group called the Akhbariyun. Akhbar. All they look at is hadith. They don't look at usul al-fiqh. So you find that with the Akhbariyun, they were really elevating themselves within Karbala. Wahid al-Bahbahani is famous that he came and he argued with them and he destroyed their arguments. After him, Sheikh Ansari comes and he basically solidifies the school of the Usulis. So basically what happens is that Ayatollah Wahid al-Bahbahani comes from a place called Bahbahan. And at that time, nobody knew who he was. He was an unknown. And he comes to Karbala. And you know when he comes to Karbala, as an alim, he finds a small mosque and over there he leads the 5 daily prayers. Now, as he's leading these 5 daily prayers, he says, look, my responsibility is to give knowledge to the people. So after Fajr prayers, right, what he does is that he gives a hadith and then he goes. The Dhuhr time comes, he gives a hadith and he goes. He says one day comes where he gives a tradition. And in that tradition he says that the not coming of the Imam is actually good for you. And you can imagine the people, right? The Mukhi gets up first of all and he says, you know, what have you said? We pray for the Imam every day. And he pushes him. And they say that to the extent that people grab the musalla from under him and they pull it. And they kick him out of the mosque. And Ayatollah Wahid al-Bahbahani says, but what I've said is not wrong, because you're not ready for the coming of the Imam. It's more than possible if the Imam was to come, you would turn against the Imam. Even though we need to pray for him to come back all the time, because that cancer is spreading in society, the disbalance is spreading in society, right? And another thing that we forget a lot of times, that we need to remember, is the Imam is for everyone. When we talk about the perfect utopia when the Imam comes, it's for all of humanity's benefit, not just for us. You know, a lot of times in the media they say, right, that the coming of the Imam, these people are waiting for the Mahdi, they're going to blow things up, Armageddon, this, that, the other. The fact of the matter is that no, they've understood it wrongly. When the Imam comes, he comes for humanity to remove their suffering, whether you're a Jew or a Christian or an atheist. As long as you are living on this earth, whether you're an animal, the Imam is coming to bring balance to this universe almost, balance to people's souls. This is why you find a tradition that says, when the Imam comes, you will see that a lion and a sheep will be drinking from the same river. Does that mean the fitrah of the lion disappears and the fitrah of the sheep disappears? No, the tradition says this, because there will be so much justice in the world, there will be so much balance in the world, that even an ant will feel the justice of Allah on the world. You see, the only other time in history that you find this is at the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. You do not find this justice anywhere, but when the Mahdi comes, you'll find this justice. That's what that movement of the Mahdi is. Coming back to Ayatollah Wahid al-Bahbahani. You know what Ayatollah Wahid al-Bahbahani says? He says he gets up and he goes into his house. They rejected him, they pushed him away. But in the tradition it says that at Fajr time there is a knock on the door. And so he says, who is it? The guy says, it's the Mukhi. He says, look, you already chucked the musalla on my face yesterday. What do you want to do? Break my legs now? Why should I open the door? He says, no, open the door. I want to ask for forgiveness. He says, really, why? He says, I'll tell you, just open the door. Opens the door, the Mukhi falls to the ground, grabs him by the feet. He says, forgive me. He says, why are you asking for forgiveness? He says, last night I saw a dream. And in my dream I saw it was the dhuhur of the Imam alayhi salam. He says, when the Imam came, I went to him. And I said to him, Mawla, we're ready for you. We pray for you every day. We want that we help you. You know what the Imam says? The Imam looks at him and says, he says that, can I have your house, for example? Because I need this for my revolution. So the guy says, no, Bismillah, you can have my house. And then the Imam turns around and says to him, but you know what? Those clothes that you're wearing, you haven't given khums on them. They're my right. Give me your clothes. And in this way, he says, that crop that you're eating, the zakat hasn't been given to it. That horse that you have, you don't realize, but that horse was usurped. And one by one, the Imam then says to him one criteria after another criteria, until that point comes where this man looks at the Imam without realizing it. He says to the Imam, Imam, have you come to make my life easier, or have you come to make my life harder? At that moment I woke up and I realized that I'm not ready for the Imam alayhi salam. You see, what is the Imam? The Imam is absolute sacrifice for the divine will. Now you tell me, are you ready for that absolute sacrifice? Can you say that you are? If you're not, create the dhuhur within yourself. Just don't look at the signs. You see, we find within our tradition that the Imam would have come back in 2 stages. In fact, if you go to our traditions, you find he would have come back in the time of the Abbasids, but you found what the Shia did was that they looked at the signs. Oh, 99% of the signs are there. Therefore, the Imam is going to come back. The Imam, didn't Allah set it back again? Why did Allah set it back? Why? Because we weren't ready. The purpose of the Imam is to be a leader over us. What is the purpose essentially? To take humanity towards its perfection. What type of perfection? 3 types of perfection are required within a society, within the universe. 1, in terms of the environment. A lot of times we forget the environment. We've got 6-liter cars, we're blowing gas into the environment, not realizing that the universe needs to be in balance. 2nd type of perfection, social perfection. Inshallah, we'll look at it tomorrow. Social perfection. 3rd type of perfection, internal perfection. The Imam is there to take all of these perfections towards his perfection, essentially. So therefore it means that we need to be ready to a level. You see, if you go to the gym, right, and I tell you to bench press 100 kilos, you're going to turn around and say to me, I can't bench press 40 kilos. So then what is going to happen? The next 6 months you try and build up. You get to 99%. You get to that 99% kilo, right? And what do? You say, Ya Ali, 100 goes through, right? In the same way, if it was to be 40,
And to give you 100, you'd guillotine yourself. In the same way, when it comes to the dhuhr of the Imam, you need to train and practice. You see, you need to be trying intellectually, socially, physically, in terms of the environment, trying to reach that perfection. You need to be out there achieving those A grades, those first grades, going into universities, becoming doctors, lawyers, solicitors. Even if you're cleaning the streets, make sure that you're the best at doing that. Make sure that you become the need of your society. If your mosques are not running properly, if the volunteers are not coming, if you can't clear your debt, for example, what does that mean? It mean you can help the system of the Imam, you can't even clear your debts. If each one of you, for example, was to contribute, and one of the brothers was saying to me, we have, for example, X amount of £1,000,000, and I calculated it. If each one of you were to give $300, your debt would be cleared. If we can't even put up, and the Jamaat hasn't actually told me to raise money for them, and I don't get a discount out of this either, but I'm thinking long term, right? Because you have such a beautiful center. If you were, each one of you to take out 300 quid, and we say quid or dollars or whatever it is, you'd clear your debt. And this is just logically thinking, I'm going to go tomorrow, right? I don't know when I'm going to be back again, or if Allah gives me life. It's for your benefit and for the benefit of your children. See, don't you see this? If you can't put your hand in your pocket, you're going to do it for the Imam? The lowest level is to put your hand in your pocket. If you can't put your hand in your pocket, you're certainly not going to be able to sacrifice the life of yourself and your children. It becomes very difficult then. So you see, the Imam is there to take the universe to balance. Once we are organized, once we have intellectually achieved what we can achieve, once we are praying on time and doing all of our wajibats, then we can say to the Imam, Imam, we have done everything within our power, now you come and take us that step forward. We have achieved 99 kilos, now you come and take us to that 100th kilo. That is the philosophy behind the dhuhr of the Imam, not sitting there on, as you say, just sitting there, thinking, yeah, well, the Imam is going to come, you know, I'm ready, I'm sitting here, and, you know, I'm not really applying for any jobs because the Imam is about to come, and you know, there's no reason to do any of this. And donating to the mosque, well, when the Imam comes, the mosque situation will be sorted out as well. And you know, I'm not going to help the Maulana and, you know, to help in the family matters, and you know, because when the Imam comes, he'll deal with all of that. You know, if the Imam was to come, let's say, for example, to London, right? There's about 100 cases of divorce and marriage there. He'd spend the next 7 years trying to solve that. Where is the revolution of the Imam then? The revolution of the Imam means that you solve your own problems. When you get to that crunch point that you can't go any further, that's when you call upon the Imam, and the Imam comes and helps you. So you see, it's a system which is in place. Understand that system in place. Balance yourself. This is why we talk about the system of balance. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We've created you as a nation of balance, not fundamentalism. See, as fundamentalism rises in Islam, it debalances Islam. Why then have you been called here to be able to take that message of balance and to take it forward? That's the Imam al-Islam. Let me take you to another tradition now. Wahid al-Bahbahani's tradition you've seen. Let me take you to another tradition. My time is flying, so inshallah, as quickly as I can give these tradition, and then nasalakum ad-dan till tomorrow. See, there was a guy by the name of Ali ibn Mahdiyar. It's a very famous tradition by him. He's a faqih, right? There's a lot of traditions which have been narrated by him. It says he goes to Hajj 19 times. The purpose of him going to Hajj 19 times is that he wanted to physically see the Imam of the time. What do we go on Hajj for? One of the secrets of Hajj is to see the Imam of the time. Said Ali Qadi says, wretched is the eye that wakes up in the morning and does not do ziyarah of the 12th Imam al-Islam. That Imam. Says 19 times he went to Hajj. Still he's not seeing the Imam. 20th year comes. He says, this year I'm not going to go to Hajj. It's not within my nasib to see the Imam. And as he goes to sleep, in his dream he says, go to Hajj. He says, why? He says, because the Imam is going to be there. He says, fine. Walks to Hajj. Gets to Hajj. He's sitting in the haram. He does his umrah tamattu, is sitting there in his haram. He's thinking, you know, I haven't seen the Imam yet. He puts his head down and he's praying and he's crying. A man comes, touches him on the shoulder. He says, man, what are you crying for? Without knowing, it comes out of his mouth. I want to see the Imam of my time. I want to see the Imam of my time. I'm missing the Imam of my time. I want to see the Imam of my time. If you have the ma'rif of the Imam, your heart dies. You want to see that Imam. You're dying for that Imam. You want to feel that Imam. You want to be able to say salam to that Imam. Because you know that Imam is suffering as well. In the same way as you're suffering, he's suffering because of your pain. He's alone today. Who is there to help him? It's like one person saw in his dream. You know what he sees? He sees that the Imam is so madloom. When it comes to Muharram, at least you find that when we recite, there's someone there to beat their chest. They say the Imam recites himself and beats his chest himself. You know what this man sees? This man sees that this Imam of ours, the Master of the Times, walks through the streets of Kufa. And when he walks through the streets of Kufa, it's as if he is seeing the footprints of Sayyidah Zainab. When he sees that, he takes his hands and he covers it so that nobody sees it. That is the Imam of the time, that's his heart. That's the pain that's in his heart. He's waiting to come back. He's waiting to come back. Ali ibn Mahdiyar says, he says, I want to see that Imam of the time. This man says, get up. I'll take you to the Imam of the time. He says, but why has it been so long? He says, no one thing, it is sin that prevents us from seeing the Imam of the time. You see, when we talk about the Imam in Ghaiba, it doesn't mean the Imam's hidden somewhere. It means that our eyes are veiled. It doesn't mean that the Imam is in a parallel dimension. It means the Imam is here, he's walking, he's talking, but we can't recognize him because of our sins. So in the same way as Yusuf was, Yusuf's brothers go to Yusuf. Yusuf's brothers don't realize who Yusuf is. It doesn't mean Yusuf was hidden. That's why they say when the Imam comes back, you'll say, I know this guy. I've been looking at him for so long. He used to say salam to me, but I didn't realize. So what happens now? Ali ibn Mahdiyar goes, outside of Mecca, there is a tent. He goes towards that tent. This man says, now get ready because the Master of the Times is coming. You know what happens? He goes towards the Master of the Times. He comes in. He says, it was the most Nurani day of my life. He falls on the ground. He kisses the Imam. He says, Imam, why didn't you come and see me? You know what the Imam says? I was there waiting for you. Why didn't you come and see me? He says, why, Imam? What happened? He said, there are 3 qualities if a person has, he becomes mahrum. He won't be able to see me. He says, what is those qualities, Imam? The Imam then says, he says, you want to see me remove these 3 qualities. He says, the first quality is this, that when you walk on the ground, you walk with arrogance when you meet other people. Arrogance of a person destroys a person. Takabbur, kibr. What is kibr? What is arrogance? What is arrogance? Arrogance is that when you violate your parameters and you violate another person. Why? Because you have a deficiency inside of yourself. That's why. If you look at people who are arrogant, it's because they are suffering and they have a deficiency. A person who is in absolute peace doesn't have a deficiency like that. When he meets people, he meets them humbly because he knows what he has is golden. But when a person who has nothing, who is void, when he meets someone, he meets them with arrogance because he has a complex. You see, he says, when a person meets another person in arrogance, at that moment, no. That moment, no, that I won't come and see you. That's why in the tradition it says, when you meet a believer, become humble in front of that believer. Pretend to look at yourself and see, you are meeting the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. This is why tonight, if not anything, remove the difficulties and the problems you may have amongst each other. I know wherever you go in the world, wherever center, people have issues with each other, right? Tonight is that night. Remove those issues from your hearts, because know your du'as are accepted when those negativities are removed. If you have those negativities, Allah can say to you, if you can't remove those negativities, why should I answer your prayers? Why should I forgive you? Can't forgive your brother then. Forgive your brother tonight. Forgive your brother and say, Allah, I have forgiven this brother, now you forgive me. Don't hold this bughd in your heart. Don't hold this aggression in your heart. Because if you hold this aggression, you find that on the moment of your death, it haunts you. Your death becomes difficult for you. But that's a different topic. You find the first thing it says that the first thing, if you walk in arrogance. It says the second thing though. You know what that second thing is? If you break the ties of relations, you break the ties of relations with your brothers. He says at that moment, he says that you will not see me. You see, look how important it is. But he comes to the third thing. And you know what that third thing is? He says that when your material wealth overcomes you, and in your life all you want to do is that material wealth, at that moment you find, what happens? Happens that you become separate from your Imam. Now you see, material wealth doesn't mean, I'll repeat them, I can see people are writing this down. The first thing is what? First thing is arrogance. Second thing is what? Cutting ties with your relationship. Third thing is that when your material wealth overcomes you. Islam doesn't say be a pauper. You see, when we talk about material wealth, we don't talk about the fact that you be poor. It doesn't mean that you're poor. It means that your wealth doesn't overcome you. You see, when we talk about today, for example, to live a good life, Islam has said live a good life, whether you're an alim or a jahil or a person or not. Everyone has been told you can lead a good life. You see, never ever confuse that. You see, 2 days ago when we were talking about the alim who's material, we're talking about an alim who's overcome by his material, not the fact that he's rich or poor or otherwise. Because wealth can be an advantage, can be a disadvantage. True zuhud is that when you divorce yourself from your wealth, If you were to give it up right then, right here, right now, you can give it up. Sometimes wealth is a good thing to do tabligh. And you find that even within the Western world. It says if an alim isn't dressed a particular way, you find a particular group of people don't come towards him. So the alim needs to somehow look presentable sometimes, wear something nicely, not smell, or for example, wear good perfume. Because Islam says, be beautiful. Sixth Imam alayhi salam is saying, wear good clothes, wear perfume, look good, dress nicely, smell well, talk well. Why? So that people are attracted towards you. That's why in the tradition it says that when it came to Sayyid al-Shuhada, you found two types of tablighs. Imam Hassan alayhi salam's tabligh was different, Imam Hussein's was different. They were appealing to two different people. You found Imam Hassan alayhi salam would wear nicer clothes. Imam Hussein, you found that he wore more ripped clothes. Why? Because certain people appealed to him, certain people. But it doesn't mean that the Imam doesn't appeal to everyone. When the Imam alayhi salam needed to appeal, he appealed to everyone. So you see, when those two brothers were there, they split the task. They did tabligh in one way, another person did in the other way. It's like Hassan al-Basri, right? Comes to the sixth Imam alayhi salam, and he says, look at me, look at the way that I dress. I dress like your Jad Amir al-Mu'mineen. What did Imam say to Hassan al-Basri? He says, look, I dress in these ways because of the needs of the time. If I was to dress like Amir al-Mu'mineen, people wouldn't come. But he said, look inside and see. Those coarse clothes are inside there. You see, zuhud means you can divorce yourself from your wealth, not that you're attached. If you have to give up everything, you can give up everything. Go back to that tradition of Wahid al-Bahbahani. What was it? You can give everything up if you need to give everything up. So let me take you to a story now. You know Ayatollah Naraki, right? Very famous Ayatollah, lived in Isfahan. A person became a darwish just because of the fact that he read his books. And after reading his books, he thought, this is the true pathway, to give up the world and become a true zahid. So he says he had one kashkol, right? He had this one bowl in his hand. You know what he does with his bowl? Everything in his life is that bowl. He used to drink from that bowl. He used to go to toilet with that bowl. He used to have a shower with that bowl. He used to put it as a pillow and he used to sleep with that bowl. He says, let me find that man who gave me guidance, hidayah. So you know what he does? He goes to Isfahan and he says, I'm going to find this guy. And he finds this Ayatollah. And he looks at his house and he thinks, wow. Because I was expecting him to live in a cardboard box. And this guy's got a two-story. He says, fine, he knocks on the door. Ayatollah comes out. He looks at him and he realizes what this guy's thinking. He says, why don't you come inside? And this Darwish is thinking to himself, it affirms the fact that this guy's a hypocrite. He lives in this lavish way. He does. He says, no, Ayatollah says, come in. Gives him food. After that, he looks at him and he says, let's go to Karbala. Let's go to Sayyid al-Shuhada. This guy looks up, he says, okay, let's go to Karbala. Halfway realizes, I've forgotten my bowl. He looks up at Ayatollah. He says, you know what, I've forgotten my bowl. He says, you know what, I'll buy you another bowl. He says, no, you don't understand. It's got sentimental values. It's my bowl. He says, why, what's the problem with the bowl? He says, I eat with that bowl. He goes, I have a shower with that bowl, when I have a shower. He says, when I go to the toilet, I use that bowl. Nothing else is as comfortable as that bowl. He says, I need that bowl. Ayatollah looks at him and says, you were thinking about my wealth. He says, I've worked hard to gain that wealth. I've got it for my family as well. But know one thing, when I said, let's go to Karbala, I divorced all of my wealth. I left everything. You know why I left everything? Because I can leave everything for the sake of the Imam. You can't leave your one attachment, which is your bowl. See, so make sure that those attachments are not in a person's heart. Destroy those attachments and you will see that you'll go on a Mi'raj. In this way, when it comes to the 12th Imam alayhi salam, it is incumbent upon us to logically sort out our mind frame. Sort it out. The best way of sorting it out, connect with your Imam. Spend a portion of your day. If it's 5 minutes, no, 5 minutes is too much. Spend 1 minute at night time before you go to sleep to just talk to your Imam. Say to Imam, Imam, I've got a lot of problems in my life and I know that only you can solve them. Talk to your Imam. Don't look at him as a concept. Look at him as a reality. Imam, look at the trouble that this world is going through. What should I be doing? Get guidance from your Imam. You see, the Imam will inspire you in your heart only and only if you're ready for that inspiration. Only if you're ready for that inspiration. Inshallah, we'll continue this tomorrow. But today, the real reason why you're here today, what is that? As these nights go on, you find your heart becomes harder. It becomes hard with what? Grief. You feel that grief in your heart, right? As these nights go, you find that tears come into your eyes. You find that you're here to give condolences to Zahra.
Let's zone out again. Let's go to our maqams again. Let's forget that we're sitting in Bathurst. You know where we should go? Let's go to Baqi, to the grave of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. Pretend that you're there. In fact, you are there. Imagine those people who've been to Baqi. Look at Baqi. Look at the beauty of our Imams. You know, when you go to Karbala, right? You see this big building which is there. How developed is it? You look at the shrine of Abul Fadl is developed. You go to Samara is developed. You go to Qadhamiyya is developed. You go to Najaf, you go to Mashhad. But let me ask you one thing. All of the son's shrine are developed, but when you look at the mother's shrine, you find that it's still broken today. So what tells you, what have we done wrong? They say in tradition, right, that 5 people cried the most. In the world, 5 people cried the most. Who were those 5 people? It says the first person was Adam alayhi salam. You know why he cried? When he was separated from Hawa, he cried for 300 years. They say the second person who cried the most was Yaqub. You know why Yaqub cried? Because he was separated from Yusuf for 33 years. He cried so much he went blind. And in the same way you find that Yusuf cried for 33 years as well. Look at Yusuf, how much he cried. Look at Nuh, he cried for 950 years. But you find that there's one person who cried for 90 days, and within 90 days her hair turned white. Who was that person? Zahra. 90 days she cried. It broke her. But the last one, they say, was Imam Zain al-Abidin. He cried for 34 years. One person comes up to Imam Zain al-Abidin and asks him, he says, Mawla, why'd you cry so much like this for? You know what he replied? He said, Yaqub had one son, Yusuf. He cried for 33 years. He says, 18 of my Yusufs were killed in one moment. He told me not to cry. Says Imam Zain al-Abidin is walking through the streets of Medina. You know what people used to do? They would hide their animals in the streets of Medina because they knew what would go on the heart of Imam Zain al-Abidin. He says that he would pass a butcher, right? You know what he would ask? He would say, have you fed this animal? Says, why, Mawla? He says, because know that my father, when he was killed without water. A person comes up to him and he says, Mawla, you talk about the fact that your father was crucified like an animal was. Tell me something about this. Why was he killed like an animal was? He says, no, my father was killed worse than an animal was. He says, how can you say that? He says that when you kill an animal, right, you feed the animal, don't you? He says, yes, we give him water. He says, my father was killed without water. He says, when, for example, you're killing an animal, right, you make sure that other animals are not watching, yeah? You don't make sure that other animals are not watching because you know that if an animal watches, what goes through on the heart of that animal. He says that when they were slaughtering my father, Sayyidah Zainab was watching, Sakina was watching, people were watching around, watching my father being crucified. He says, and also, you know when an animal is being cut, you sharpen the knife, don't you? Says, yes. He says, when my father was crucified, the knife was blunt. 17 or 14, it says, it took them to rip my father's neck off like this. Says, look, my father was killed worse than an animal. And it says, after that, when that animal is killed, right, when the animal is slaughtered, you don't desecrate the body of an animal, do you? He says that they desecrated the body of my father in such a way that horses were trampling over it. His ribs were breaking from one angle to another angle. His bones were being shattered from one place to another place. Says, this is the way they treated my father. This is why Imam Zain al-Abidin cries. But you know what? Somebody comes to the Imam, he says, Mawla, you told me, they say that your miras, your inheritance is shahada. Why do you cry for? You know what Mawla says? He says, shahada may be our miras, but watching our women go from Kufa to Sham is something that we cannot take. Let me ask you a question. Does your ghaira allow that even for a minute, your wife or your daughter or your mother was to be taken without hijab and to be taken in Toronto's downtown? Even for 1 minute, if they were to walk there, you would die of shame looking at your women walking without hijab or being stripped of their hijab. Now imagine that Imam Zain al-Abidin, that from Kufa to Shami is walking and there is no hijab on the ladies. That's what he says. He says, what destroys me is Sham. Why? Because when Zainab was walking in Sham, people would look at her, people would chuck dirt at her, people would chuck stones at her. It says in the tradition, it says Imam Zain al-Abidin's hands were tied behind his back. But when the stones used to come, the greatest jihad is this. He used to put his body in the way so they would protect the stones from hitting Sayyidah Zainab. All of these stones are coming onto the body of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam.
See, this is tragedy. You know, they say that Ayyub, right? Nabi Ayyub. You've heard this tradition before. You see, Nabi Ayyub, all of the tests and trials and tribulation. But when a man comes to his wife, it says, show me 2 locks of your hair, because we hear you from the children of Yusuf. When she comes crying back, she says, this is what happened. Ayyub raises his hands and said, Allah, the test is enough for me. You've tested me in health, I took that. You tested me in wealth, I took that. Children, my children died in front of me. You tested me with everything, but don't test me with my ghaira. Don't test me with my wife. He says, I can't take this anymore. He says, remove this test from me now, Allah. Allah removed it. Now imagine the test of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. Let's go towards the musibah. Let's look at the masaib of Ahlul Bayt. You know what the masaib of Ahlul Bayt is? Before we go on, remember one tradition. You know what that tradition is? That tradition is in Tirmidhi. You know what that tradition, Ahlul Sunnah say this in Tirmidhi. It says that Sayyid al-Shuhada was 3 years old. And 3 years old Sayyid al-Shuhada comes to Rasulullah. And he says to Rasulullah, you know what he says? He says, grandfather, I want to ride your horse. He says, I want to ride your horse. May Allah accept your du'as. They say that when you ask with your tears, Allah accepts it. You know, we can't cry continuously. May Allah accept your du'as. So Sayyid al-Shuhada comes to Rasulullah. He says, grandfather, I want to ride your horse. You know what Rasulullah says? He says, other than me and your father, no one can ride this horse. He says, but I want to ride it. Why can't they ride it? Because anybody who sits on it, the horse chucks him away. You know what Rasulullah does? He says, fine, let me put you on the horse. 3-year-old Sayyid al-Shuhada, he puts him on the horse and he begins to smile. You know why he smiles? He says, look at my grandson. Look at the way that he rides. Look at the way that he is. Look at his jamal. Look at his waqar. Look at his haiba. And then after that he begins to cry. Ashab say, why are you crying for? He says, because that same Hussein and that same horse will be there in Karbala. And at that moment Hussein will be calling out for help and there won't be anyone to help him. When he says, Hal min nasiri yansurana, there will be no one to come to help him. He will be alone there. He will be thirsty there. He will be gharib there. Ultimately he'll be gharib there. There will be no one to help him. At that moment Rasulullah says, know who this Hussein is. When he asks for help, go and help him, but I can see no one will help him. That is Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know what it says in the tradition? It says that there was another 3-year-old child. Rasulullah watches him. When that child begins to cry, Rasulullah begins to shake. He runs towards that child. He lifts him up. He puts him on his lap. He hugs that child. He kisses that child. Somebody says, why are you crying over a child who's not yours? You know what he says? He says, because when he cries, his crying reminds you of my Hussein. Every time he cries, it hurts my heart. It makes my heart shake. You know who that child was? Habib ibn Madahir. You know what it says is Ma'al Sibtain? It says that Habib ibn Madahir, as a child, when he used to walk, at 3 years old, he would walk behind Sayyid al-Shuhada. He would take the dirt from the ground where Sayyid al-Shuhada walked from. He would kiss it and he would put it in his eyes. Rasulullah says to Madahir, he says, your son Habib loves my Hussein. He'll be always there for my Hussein. He says, I love him as well. You know what happens in a tradition? In that tradition it says, Amir al-Mu'mineen is coming with Sayyid al-Shuhada. Habib is standing there on top of the roof. Habib sees, but Habib's a child. It says that in excitement, Habib falls and he hits the ground. And as he hits the ground, they say that his body is broken. He's shaking. He becomes unconscious. He's about to leave this world. When Sayyid al-Shuhada sees that his friend has fallen, he comes running towards him. He says, Father, I'll do the dua. You say Ameen. He raises his hands and says, may Habib ibn Madahir recover. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Ameen. At that moment, Habib stands up. You know, Habib doesn't say, Mawla, I'm hurting. Habib, you know what he says? He says, Mawla, I've been waiting for you to come. Are you okay, my master? Says, are you okay, my master? That is Habib ibn Madahir. That's how much he loves. You know, they say that Imam Hussein doesn't write a letter to anyone, but only a couple of people. One of them was Habib ibn Madahir. In the tradition it says 6th day comes in Muharram. The 6th of Muharram come. Sayyidah Zainab is sitting with Sayyid al-Shuhada, and Sayyidah Zainab is watching army upon army comes. She asks, where is this army coming from? Sayyid al-Shuhada replies, this is an army coming from Kufa to kill me. Another 1,000 person comes. Why is, for example, Shimr coming? He's coming to kill me. One by one army is coming. You know what Sayyidah Zainab says to Sayyid al-Shuhada? Says, where's our followers? Where are our helpers? We're alone here. Why isn't anyone coming? He says, no, someone is coming for us. Imam Hussein writes a letter, and that's only one letter he recites to Habib ibn Madahir. In the tradition it says this. It says, Habib is sitting in his house. Habib is sitting in his house and he's eating. In the battle of Siffin, Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Habib, he says, Habib, when you are eating, right, when you're sitting with a risk, Whoever comes, even if your parents come, do not stand up for them. Only if the Imam of the time comes, then stand up. You know what happens? Habib is eating. There is a knock on the door. When that knock comes, Habib says, who is it? You know what that person replies? Ana Burid al-Hussein. Says, I'm the messenger of Hussein, and I brought for you a letter. They say Habib gets up and he runs. And as he runs barefooted, he comes to the door. He opens the door. He looks at that letter. The first thing he does, he kisses the letter, puts it on his eyes, and he opens it up. You know what he reads? Min Hussein ibn Ali ila rajulan faqih Habib ibn Mudahir. Sayyid al-Shuhada is writing, you know what he writes in that letter? He says, Habib, we are trapped in Karbala. We are gharib now. There is no one to help me. The swords are coming. He says, Habib, be quick and come and help us. You know what Habib does? He puts away the letter. He wants to test his wife, right? He comes in and he sits down on the table, and he sits down, and his wife asks him, he says, what was that letter? What is Hussein asking? What is the Master of the Times asking? Oh, the Master of the Times is saying that he's calling us to come. He's surrounded by his enemies. You know what his wife looks up and says, Habib, your master is surrounded, our master, and you're not getting up and going to fight? Says, give me your sword, you sit in the house, I'll go and fight for Hussein. At that moment, tears come into his eyes. He says, don't worry, I was only testing you. He says to his slave, he says, why don't you go and wait for me, and I'm coming. He says on the pathway, he bumps into Muslim ibn Osaja, and he looks towards him, and he says to this 90-year-old man, he says, you know what? Do you know what's happened to Hussein? He says, what? He says, Hussein is alone there. He is gharib there. He is thirsty there. He needs someone to help him. They say that this man's back was already broken. He was 90 years old. But somehow he puts himself up, and he says, Habib, take me as well. Take me towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. They say Habib is walking towards the horse, right? Habib ibn Mudahir. This is the part that kills you, right? Because the slave is standing there and the slave is conversing. And as he converses, he says, if my master doesn't come, I'll ride on you and I'll go towards Karbala. You know what Habib says? He looks towards Karbala. He says, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. What a day has come when the slave is taking pity upon the master. He said, my slave is taking pity upon you, Hussein. He says that, look, this is that day that's come. He says, I freed you, slave. You know what the slave says? He says that on the day when you should be taking me, you're freeing me. So in the tradition they say he takes him. Karbala comes, 7th day comes, 8th day comes, 9th day comes, 10th day comes, the day of Ashura comes. Muslim ibn Osaja says to Sayyid al-Shuhada, he says, look, I want to go and fight. I want to go and give my life for you. But you know what? I'm old. You know what Sayyid al-Shuhada says? He says, why don't you stand in front of me when I pray, and then after that, take all of the arrows. You know what he does? He ties his back up as if he was a young man. He ties his head back. You know why? Because I'm going to give my life for Hussein. He says to Sayyid al-Shuhada, I know I can't fight. I know I'm going to die. But there's one thing that I can do. I can stand there. Sayyid al-Shuhada says, Allahu Akbar. The arrow comes. He takes one arrow in his chest. He takes another. But he's smiling because he knows. And he's praying to Allah. He's saying, Allah, don't take my life until Imam doesn't finish his prayer. Eventually he hits the floor. Sayyid al-Shuhada finishes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. He says he falls. As he falls onto the ground, Habib ibn Mudahir goes running. Sayyid al-Shuhada goes running. You know what Habib says? He says, Muslim, had I known that I would have lived today, I would have asked you for a will. Muslim says, you know what? Let me give you a will anyway. You know what he says? He says, Usika bihada. He looks towards Sayyid al-Shuhada and he says, don't leave him alone. Whatever happens, Habib, don't leave the son of Zahra alone. Give your life before. You know what Habib says? He says, I was going to go and give it anyway. In the tradition it says, when Habib is now coming, he gets on this horse and he goes. As he goes towards Karbala, you know what Sayyid al-Shuhada says? He says that my guest is here. My guest is here. He sends Abbas there. Abbas goes and he receives Habib. Habib comes and he falls onto the feet of Sayyid al-Shuhada. When Sayyidah Zainab says to Fidda, who's come? You know what happens? You know what he replies? She says, Habib is here. She says, go and give my salam to Habib. If you could take this bit, you say, Fizza goes towards Habib. You know what she says? She says, the daughter of Zahra gives salam to you. You know what Habib does? He takes his amama off and he begins to hit it on his head. And you know what he says? What a day has come when the queen of the world is giving salam to a slave. Ala la'natullahi lakum wa alameen. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. For the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, may Allah accept our worship today. For the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, whatever troubles we're having, whatever pains that we have in our life, may Allah remove those pains and sufferings within us. Wherever there are followers of the Ahlul Bayt, wherever they are, Pakistan, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Syria, wherever they are in the world, may Allah protect their lives.
their properties, and their respects. One tradition. With this tradition, pray to Allah. Ask Allah to accept all of those people who have come here, for all of us. You know what it says? It says in the tradition that when Sayyidah Zainab on the 11th night, on the 11th day came, Sayyidah Zainab is standing there and she's gathering all of the children. As she gathers all of the children, the enemy comes and they tie each one of them by the neck. In the tradition it says one rope was for all of them. Somebody says in the tradition, why is it that the women were bending down like this? He said the reason being is that Sakina was small. Every time they raised their heads, it would hurt Sakina like this. They said that they had a camel. You know what Shimr did? He took the girl, he tied her on top of the camel without a saddle. You know the camel is coarse, right? It moves. They say Sakina was dressed in white. When they put her on that and they tied her on that, when the camel would move, her rib would move. As her rib would move, her rib would shatter. The coarseness would hurt on her body that when they got to Kufa, she was covered from head to toe in red blood. In this way, it would hurt her like this. Now let me ask you, what was going on the heart of Sayyid al-Shuhada? As he was watching from that, when they raised his head, tears would come into his eyes and tears would drip from his eyes. You know what Sakina would do? Every time anybody raised their heads, her head would raise up like this. Every time it would raise like this, it would choke her. Every time it would choke her, she would look to the head of her father, and then after that she would look to the head of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. She would say, uncle, I don't want water anymore. You just come back. For the sake of that moment, may Allah accept all of our du'as. May Allah hasten the dhuhur of the Imam alayhi salam and make us all part of his ansar. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin. Matam Hussein.